Madam Chairperson, board members, Superintendent Rice, ladies and gentlemen. Since this process began, we've been told that the school board members are ultimately the ones that will make any decision respecting the schools within the Strait feeder system. Tonight is the first opportunity that we have had to formally and directly address the board as a whole, and we hope that our presentation helps to inform this most important conversation. We want to provide an overview of the process to date, followed by a condensed version of the public meeting we held. We want to offer a rationale for keeping the Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre. We also want to provide options for the board's consideration. We'll end our presentation with closing comments and address any questions that you may have. Back in 2013-14, the province initiated a new review process. The minister at the time basically said, let's stop and rethink this public review process. A panel was struck. They write a report. The report submitted to the minister. The minister agrees with the recommendations within the report. It's set into law. Those dates are all a matter of public record. The Strait Regional School Board, shortly thereafter, establishes a calendar of events to occur over the next period of time, looking at issues such as school reviews, transportation reviews, and operational reviews, etc. In October 2015, the Strait Regional School Board initiated the first review of a school, or in this case, a feeder system of schools, using the new school review process. A school options committee is struck, and they worked very hard and diligent in their roles. 3 public meetings were held by the student options committee, one in November. The attendance at that meeting was very low. A second meeting on January 18th, the attendance was considerably larger. At that meeting, we were told the committee is working on options. In the Chronicle Herald the next morning, we read that the Mulgrave School is being recommended for closure. A group of concerned citizens came together to discuss how to intervene in this conversation. We decided that the best course of action would be to call a public meeting and invite stakeholders to view a presentation regarding the subject of the Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre. That public meeting on the 15th of February, we videotaped it, and it is available on a YouTube channel that's attached to the Facebook that we have, called Support Mulgrave School. Within that presentation, we talk about the rationale for the school itself. We look at the purpose really is to engage stakeholders in the review process. That meeting was structured to provide information on the school review process, because not everybody has a thorough understanding of how that works. We presented observations that we made on that review process. We presented options for the Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre. The latter part of that presentation, we provided summary advice to the School Options Committee, as well as summary advice to the school board members. Since that time, the School Options Committee has notified the board that they would not have any recommendation as part of their final report. The next piece I want to spend some time on is the reasons why the school should remain open. And I want to refer to the 7 elements that we believe provide a rationale for keeping the school in Mulgrave. And they are quality of education, financial, transportation and safety, capacity of receiving school, P3 school implications, community and its impacts, and the fairness of the review process. These are the reasons we think the school should remain open. The first of those is quality of education. We've cited research papers that spoke to the benefits of a smaller school environment. We reviewed and provided our own analysis of the assessments for grade 3, 4, 6, and 8 for both Mulgrave and Tamarack. Our purpose in doing this is not to pit school against school, or teacher against teacher, or community against community, but merely to illustrate that perhaps a more serious look should be taken before final decisions are made. We highlighted the difference that we found, and from our perspective, the quality of education at Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre is on par or exceeds the school board averages. The last piece of the quality of education summarized in that final bullet is that there is no longer any argument about whether reducing class sizes in the primary grades increases student achievement. The research evidence is quite clear. It does, and that's by Alex Morad in 1999. The next section we want to talk about is financial. The new review process stipulates that you must follow a prescribed methodology to define how you measure the cost of the school. It's defined by their maintenance and energy cost. The new review process does not include the cost of teachers and other staff, as this is too difficult to quantify. Hence the difference in the numbers we use and what was shown at SRSB on February 16th, when there was an implication that the additional cost over and above maintenance and energy is about $345,000. Well, that's not supposed to be part of the review process. So when you look at the financial situation at the Mulgrew Memorial Education Centre, the total cost for maintenance and energy costs is $260,221. We know that 42% of the space is occupied by the Professional Development Centre. So if you back that out, you're really talking about the total cost for energy and maintenance at that school is about $150,000. That $150,000 equates to 1/5 of 1% of the school board expenditures. There is some discrepancy between the numbers in terms of, we quoted earlier that the total expenditure is $91 million. $150,000 of that is towards the Mulgrew School, which represents 1/8 of 1%. The superintendent has suggested that that number is not the correct number. There should be more like 70 million. Well, we've gone back, looked at those audited financial statements, and the board receives about $70 million from the province of Nova Scotia for purposes of education. They receive an additional $12 million from the municipalities, and there's other sundry revenues that make up that balance to bring it up to $91 million. Regardless, the number is very minute. You're talking the difference between either 1/5 to 1/8 of 1%. It's immaterial in the grand scheme of things. To put it in context, that $150,000 really, if you put that in the form of salary, there are a number of directors of the school board, and if you take their base salary, add on the cost of pension, add to that the mandatory employment related cost, you're up to somewhere around that $150,000. So really it equates to one salary position. The other piece that we'd like to spend a minute on is on, back in 2012, the province announced $1.3 million for the school to undergo a retrofit. There was a lot of design work that was done, tenders were called, then all of a sudden the project's canceled. So we learn in 2012 that there's going to be a retrofit, and we're thinking that's going to happen. 2014-15, it's still in the provincial government's capital development plan for the province. Then all of a sudden it's closed, or excuse me, it's canceled. So you can only imagine our dismay that first your school is going to be fixed up, and then all of a sudden, no, it's going to be closed. So we're confused by that whole piece. The next one that we want to spend a few minutes on is on a very critical issue as part of this whole conversation. That's to deal with transportation. We included this stock photo to illustrate the innocence of what we're dealing with. These are small elementary kids. These kids are highly dependent. They're on a rope for a reason. They are naive and they need to be led or at least contained to minimize risk to themselves. This segment is about transporting them to and from school. Busing of children is one of the highest risks that any school board needs to contend with, and this is not going to go away. In fact, if a decision is made to close the school, the transportation risks have just increased in odds, and you're also saying that you're going to do this for perhaps decades to come. At a meeting at SRSB, a gentleman by the name of Edwin Wright, who identified himself as an engineer that's been involved in transportation safety for many years, approached the mic and he talked about the need to ensure that you have good, solid, reliable data to consider before you make a decision of this magnitude. The data that you have is for a little more than a 2-year period. There really is a burden of proof set upon the board to provide evidence that transporting kids across the causeway is a safe proposition. It's his suggestion, and one in which I agree, that you do not have sufficient data to say that it is a safe proposition to transport our children. There have been 4 deaths on what we call the Cape Hill and 1 death on the causeway in my memory. That is 5 too many. Closing the school just ups your odds in tempting fate. You go from somewhere around 55 kids being transported now to 116 being transported. The next piece, we show the video or a photo of the canceled causeway, and as part of this presentation we show that one photo crossing the causeway, and it's heading west towards the mainland. It's an exterior shot of the bus. What is significant about that particular photo is the wave action and how it's breaking over the causeway. That photo was taken in October, so it depicts a day in the fall. We don't have a video that we're showing that the whiteout conditions when the ice comes in on the north side of the causeway and it becomes impassable on days because of snow and so on. We show another photo of a bus heading towards Cape Breton on a different day, encountering the same or similar wave action. We showed a video that shows the wave action hitting the high tension lines. We also showed a video of one of our buses coming through the haze of waves and water. We provided video of a tractor trailer tipping over on the same day as our bus is traveling the causeway. I have a short narrative to read from a student on that bus that I want to share in a minute. We also have a separate incident of another tractor trailer tipping over on the causeway. We have a copy of a video taken from inside the bus that we haven't released because we think it's too disturbing. There have been way too many near misses for us not to stand up and say that this is an issue. This is about safety, and our situation is quite unique. Transporting elementary kids out of the community is fraught with risk and danger. Heading east across the Cancel Causeway is a high-risk proposition. Heading west towards East Antigonish is no less dangerous. There have been at least 23 deaths between Mulgrave and East Antigonish in the last 30 to 40 years. I'm going to spend just a minute on recounting the story that's been provided to us by a student. And this is what she says. This is the narrative from that young student on the bus. I've been hearing about a lot of concerned parents, students, and community members regarding the Cancel Causeway and other transportation issues. Their concerns and questions regarding traveling are important and all, are extremely valid. I, along with friends, have had a personal experience on the causeway back in 2014. I want to share this with you. On this day of an early dismissal, Mulgrave students were running late, returning home from buses from Sarek. The weather conditions by that time had gotten much worse on the roads, and especially on the causeway. When a bus approached the causeway after a detour at the rotary from fallen signs, our bus driver instructed that we all move to the right-hand side of the bus. I was confused at the time, wondering why, until it was obvious. There was a transfer truck flipped over to the left, and the causeway was a complete disaster. The wind was so strong it was forcing huge waves up over the bus. It was creating poor visibility and a very unsafe situation for all of us. I remember thinking to myself in this moment that this was going to be it. What if the bus goes like the transfer truck? I tried to stop myself from thinking, but I couldn't. As a grade 10 student at the time, I was literally terrified and shaking when I did finally get home after what seemed to be the longest bus ride ever. My mom, like many, were unaware of the situation at the time, as it had only suddenly happened. I was nervous crossing the causeway even days later. It was completely unsafe that day and many other days. I could not possibly imagine what would be going through a little grade primary's mind in a time or situation like this. What would they honestly do with no parents or teachers on a bus to assist them? The bus driver, as much as they may want to pull over or just simply be the students on the causeway, that can't happen. I have 2 younger brothers, and I do not ever want them or anyone else to have to go through anything like this ever. Things can change in the blink of an eye, and the situation that day could have easily been prevented. Heaven forbid anything actually happened on the causeway. To me, it's bad enough grade 9 to 12 students have to witness the causeway on days such as this. Let's not do this to younger students or anyone else. It should not be necessary. That's an extremely powerful story. At the Sarek meeting on the 16th of February, a different young lady stood up to tell virtually the same story. These are not figments of our imagination. These are real life events that are happening on that causeway. We really need to think twice about transporting kids across that causeway. We'll look at the next piece, and it's on the capacity of tech. The Tamarack Education Center has 547 kids enrolled in there this year. Utilization rate is at 80%. It has one of the highest utilization rates within the school board system. Adding upwards to 60 more students will push the school to its limits on functionality. We don't know what the impact of resettlement of folks from out west will have on the school, or any potential new development may have on the school enrollments. We believe the focus needs to be on smaller numbers, not on larger numbers. Individualized instruction works much better with smaller class sizes. The next piece on P3 schools, that is still a big question mark. There is a process that needs to unfold over the next several years that can have an impact on this school board. I believe you have something like 7 of these P3 schools. I believe making a decision to close a school with this piece not being resolved would be considered by some to be imprudent. A CBC report in 2010 said one thing is clear from the Auditor General's report. No one in government has a handle on a myriad of contracts that make up the P3 program. So knowing these things, does it make sense to go ahead and close down a school, take those students and put them in another school that has implications that I've just mentioned for P3? The next piece is on community. And we've broken it into 2 pieces. The first relates to the value of the school in the community. The second is a particular situation in our community and what we call community preoccupation. The first bullet really needs no explanation. I think universally people, particularly in rural communities, really view schools as the heart of their community. Children from birth to age 4 or 5 generally are only exposed to family and friends. And then school starts. It's the first day of school. It's the Christmas concerts. It's heritage fairs. It's science fairs. It's sports. That is the heart of your community. Early childhood development is seen as a precursor to lifelong learning. The better equipped the child is at an early age, the better the prospects of success with lifelong learning. Minimizing stress and anxiety can act as an enabler to very impressionable minds. The school itself is used for other functions other than educating our kids. That's a primary function, but also it's used for health and fitness programs, recreational opportunities, and community functions like Remembrance Day ceremonies that have been held at that facility since it was built back in 1952. The next piece on community preoccupation, had we not been preoccupied with the town dissolution process, perhaps we would have reacted more quickly so as to avoid these 11th hour conversations like we're having tonight. We didn't realize until it was too late that we are now unable to submit any kind of a hub school concept. I really don't know if all of this happened because of happenstance or coincidence or design. What we do know is that we were not prepared for this as we should have been. And at this stage, it appears that we can't pursue the path of a hub school concept, for example. The next segment of our presentation deals with options. And I mentioned at the start of this is that we had identified 7 elements. And one of those was the fairness of the review process. I'm not going to spend any time on that because I think it has not been fair, but I think that's more to be dealt with as part of a post-mortem that the board could look at when there is more time. I want to focus on the options that were presented. At the public meeting in February 15th at the Fire Hall in Mulgrave, we presented what we call 7 options. In this presentation, there are actually 9 options. And what we're saying by these things is that there are a myriad of options. There's all kinds of options out there. Do we know which ones are viable versus ones that are not? Not exactly. But our point is that the mandate that was struck for this school options committee was so narrow that you didn't look at some of these other options. So our point is that you should be exhausting all other options before closure is considered. And if closure is the option, where do you go with the kids? So a 10th option that's not even mentioned in here is the whole issue of Guysborough, for example. If that school were to close, can we send the kids to Guysborough? Or do we send them to the east? Or do we send them to Port Hawkesbury? The point is that there are options that were not explored. So we kind of reiterate those here. The first of those options is the primary one that we want to deal with, and that's retaining the P-8 at Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre. We believe that we have a unique situation in Mulgrave that says the kids should stay in that school. We already transport the 9 to 12 to Port Hawkesbury. We're not looking to go backwards in terms of saying bring those kids back. We understand that there are economic challenges on, but we do not think we should be putting more kids in harm's way by closing the P-8 and transporting them to Port Hawkesbury. If you look at the work that's been done over the years with the Professional Development Center and having that as part of the school, we think that's a good practice. That is innovative. That is bigger thinking. And we think you can augment that by putting the school board office in there as well. So you have the school board office, you have the Professional Development Center, and you have your P-8. That offsets the cost that you have for that school for a long, long time in the future. Or you could consider a primary 6 option for Mulgrave School. We don't want to go down those roads, whether it's primary 6 or primary 4. We want P-8. But if all else fails, then there is some desire to look at some kind of type of compromise here. So consider primary to 6 options. Consider primary to 4. You could also consider a realignment of the school boundaries so that Mulgrave students attend East Antigonish Education Centre. As we've gone through this process, there are folks that question whether East Antigonish, for example, is a viable option. And what we heard is that the transportation issues getting to East Antigonish may be no less treacherous than traveling the Cancel Causeway. So really, is that a viable option? I don't think so. But it's an option was put out to illustrate that other things need to be considered before you just say you're going to close the school. You should allow consideration for the hub school concept at Mulgrave facility. Given the fact that it is such a small amount of money to operate that school at 1/5 of 1% of the annual board expenditures, we think there should be a reconsideration of closure to that school. Also, given that the assessments indicate that the quality of education at Mulgrave is on par or exceeds the school board averages, and those that there is some opportunity here to study that, to see whether or not that is if you did a longitudinal study over a 5-year period, for example, you may be able to ascertain whether or not there is some credence to this smaller school concept and use that, because this problem of schools closures is not going to go away. You're going to be faced with it time and time again. Another option that has not been considered is that why not look at the feeder system that you have, perhaps you move to a P to 6 in Mulgrave and a P to 6 at Tamarack, and SRSB becomes 7 to 12. It provides much better disbursement of your numbers. If you've got 940 students in the feeder system, then you could split that to having it more like 425 to each one of the schools of Port Hawkesbury at Tamarack and at SRSB, and the balance are at the Mulgrave School. That would lead to smaller class sizes. I think people would be amicable to that type of an option, for example. So those are the options. They're not meant to be all-inclusive. There are others, I'm sure, and one of the things that I stressed at a meeting on January 18th is that we really need to be thinking bigger. We really need to be thinking outside the box. How do we actually come up with solutions that are manageable and that work over the long term? Because these problems in rural communities are not going to go away, folks. We really need to think long and hard of how we make things work in the future. So in summary, there are 7 elements that we've identified that suggest there's ample rationale to keep the Mulgrave School open. So if we look at this from those elements, quality of education, it's on par or exceeds school board averages. That shouldn't be an issue, shouldn't be a reason to close the school. Financial, it's a very small amount of money to keep that school operating over the long term. The biggest issue is transportation safety. Why are we tempting fate and putting more kids on buses to ship them across that causeway? That does not make sense to us. And it really is a safety issue that needs to be addressed. The capacities of receiving schools, the receiving school is being tech, it's already at capacity. At 80%, you're running it as far as you should. You shouldn't be pushing the envelope beyond that 80 percentile, or functionality will drop off. We talked about the P3 school implications. We don't know where that's going. Let's take the time to make sure that we know where that's going. Let's look at the impact on the community, as I mentioned earlier. One of the things that we're very concerned about here in this whole process is that we don't want a short-term solution. We're looking at long-term. We want a solution that is here for a long period of time. That causeway is not going to get any less dangerous in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years down the road. This really needs to be a long-term view. So with that, we think there are options, and we have highlighted 9 of them. The list of options, as I said, is not all-inclusive. There are other options. We need to think bigger. On a financial basis, there will be no substantive savings in closing that school. And I repeat, there will not be any substantive savings in closing that school. From a safety perspective, closing the school just increased the risk exponentially. It's not linear, it's exponentially. It's going to go up by a whole bunch, folks. So our advice to the school board is this. If the priority of the school board is really student-centered, and in the light of the legitimate safety concerns we have raised, we suggest that the Mulgrave Memorial Education Centre be treated as a unique situation. And that's what it is. It is unique in terms of coming down, leaving Mulgrave and going down the Cape Hill, going east or west, really is not an option for them little kids. And if the priority of the school board is quality of education, and if there's any credence to the assessments, we suggest the board should go back to the drawing board. Our closing remarks are this. There will be consequences to any decision the board makes, and there will be unintended consequences to any actions of the board. We need to be extremely careful in the direction that we proceed. We trust that the board will exercise sound judgment, logic, and prudence in your deliberations. Your decision to leave the school open doesn't change the world in the grand scheme of things, but closing the school changes our world as we know it. And as Joe Brennan had highlighted on one of the Facebook pages, that where there's hope, there's opportunity. We still have hope. We think there's still opportunity. And we ask that you consider this as part of your deliberations. Thank you.